have a blue line.
Oh, I get a blue line.
Yeah,
My
I don't
limousine.
see one. But usually when I watch you live, I can hear you say, "Let's wait for the blue line." So I think it is all
And it
right.
has come. Very good. Hey, everyone, and welcome to day 9 of Thriving in the Face of Cancer. I'm your host, Chef AJ, and for the next 22 days, I will be talking to top doctors and other healthcare professionals, as well as people who have survived cancer, who will be giving you insights on how you too can thrive, even in the face of cancer. Today's guest is Dr. Jen Howk, who will discuss going from secrets to strength, embracing radical honesty in the face of cancer. Please welcome her to the show. No, long time no see.
Long time no see. It's so good to be here.
I
How's it
know.
how's it going other than the obvious?
And the obvious is actually going well. And I really am doing well. And it's all up here, you know? And
Well,
thank you so much for reaching out. You reached out to me, you sent me love and a kind email. And I said, hey, why don't you come on the show? Because you've kind of, I don't want to say changed completely in the direction you were going, but you're into different concepts now and different teachings. And you wrote a new book, which I listened to, and it was wonderful. And just tell everybody what you've been up to.
yeah. I think the best way to describe it is that, I sort of was very deep in the evolutionary psychology paradigm for a while. I think the last time I was on the show, I was very much all about a very strict kind of fundamentalist interpretation of evolutionary psychology. And my thoughts and perspectives on it have, they've evolved. I see evolutionary psychology as a tool, one tool among many, but I also am really interested in other self-improvement modalities and healing modalities, as I know that you've become interested in these things as well, because I think there's, it's a spaghetti at the wall kind of approach. We just use everything that might work and everything that we can use, and why limit ourselves to anything in particular? I think if there are tools that can help us get the job done, even if we're a little bit resistant to them, or they don't have the same kind of evidence grounding that some other things do. They have different types of evidence to support them. Then we should be open-minded about that. So yeah, I've been going down my own journey with that, and exploring all of these concepts in the book and with clients, and just learning a lot as I go. And it's been a joy. So.
Well, your book is very well written, number one, but also the voice performance was excellent. It's almost like, have you had training as a professional voice actor or even actor?
Not formal training. I grew up in the newsroom of my father. So my dad was a public radio reporter and news director, and there was a lot of time spent in the newsroom with the sound, the on-air lights on, and so I think I may have absorbed some of his on-air manner back in the day. But or it just runs in the genes. Who's to say?
Well, I thought it was great, and it was really a pleasure to listen to. And the thing is a lot of the stuff you're talking about, I've always been into, but it's just I've always felt like, oh, I can't say it because this channel is for cooking and for health information. But you know what? I'm not afraid to be myself anymore, and I think you aren't either.
Yeah, that's what the whole radical honesty concept is all about. It's what the book is all about. It's in not being ourselves that we create the most suffering for ourselves, and that can be physical suffering, but it's certainly, even if it doesn't create physical suffering, it's going to make anything that we're experiencing more difficult and more saturated with regret and depression and anger and resentment and all of these things we want to get away from.
And Radical Honesty, isn't that the name of a book that I think I must
It
have read a
is.
very long time
It
ago?
is, yeah. So I did not coin the concept. This is attributed to a guy named Brad Blanton, who wrote the book and I think trademarked the term. So we should give him credit. But he wrote a book called, the original book is just called Radical Honesty, and then he has a series of workshoppy workbook type derivatives from that original concept, but the concept itself is fairly straightforward and simple, and certainly the idea of just being completely transparent and honest all the time is not anything that we can attribute to one person's idea.
Yeah. Well, I think that's hard for people because I think many people spend their whole lives hiding in the shadow, afraid to be who they are.
Yeah, I think almost everyone does. In Blanton, in his book, I remember first picking up the book. I was probably in my 20s at some point, and I just ran across this thing. And the first couple of paragraphs, which I can share, I think I have a slide of them. He says that lying is the root of most suffering in the Western world. It's the fact that we are untruthful with ourselves and with others, and really radical honesty is less about, people hear this and they're like, well, I don't tell that many lies. I'm a pretty truthful person. But what kind of lies of omission are you telling? It's not so much the lies of commission, that you lied about where you were last night, or whether someone's butt looks fat in that dress or whatever. It's what you're not saying. It's going along with something that you don't want to do. It's not setting a boundary when you want to set a boundary. It's all of these ways that we suppress ourselves and our desires and our who we really are, and we play a role. We put on a mask and we put on a performance to keep ourselves feeling safe and to keep the peace with everyone around us. And that was one of the kind of points where I started to depart a little bit from the way that conventional evolutionary psychology works, because evolutionary psychology, very often the advice will be, if you're in a bad situation, just kind of sideways skedaddle your way out of that situation and maybe tell some white lies to ease the exit a little bit. And I think there may be cases where that's appropriate. I'm not a total radical honesty evangelist in the sense that I think you need to absolutely tell the absolute total truth all the time. You can always do this thought experiment where, are you really going to tell the Gestapo that you have Anne Frank in the attic? Like, there are moments where probably radical honesty is not appropriate. But the ease with which we tell white lies, it's a very slippery slope to betraying ourselves and to betraying who we are. And so I think bringing in a lot more mindfulness about that and being willing to experience the discomfort that you're trying to avoid by telling that white lie, there's so much value in that, and that is a very healing process for people to do.
Yeah. How do people get started though, especially after a lifetime of not doing it? I think it might be difficult for people.
Yeah, I recommend that people start small. There's a couple of exercises that are really useful, and some of these come from the radical honesty workshops and things that the trainers themselves recommend, and others are just kind of intuitive and things that you can practice with. But one of the prompts that they will use is that, maybe once this week with somebody that you're close to, you can have a conversation where you follow the prompt, sometimes I pretend dot dot dot. And getting into this, this is going to reveal something that you're usually in the habit of hiding from people, especially that you're close to. And you've been hiding it for a reason. There are things that you don't want people to know about you because you're worried that if they did know it, they would change their opinion of you, and therefore they might reject you, they might abandon you, they might criticize you. And you're not so afraid of the abandonment and rejection as you're afraid, and you're unwilling to feel how you are going to feel, or how you believe you will feel if that happens. And so you were a little child who is defending yourself against these scary emotions that were potentially annihilatingly scary when you were very small, and now you're continuing to stay in these patterns where, because you're so afraid of those big feelings, you will orchestrate your life around all of these lies of omission and commission, and really be afraid to tell people the truth about anything. So putting yourself in a position where you can follow a very simple prompt like that is just a way to dip your toe into the water and notice what happens in your body when you tell the truth. You notice what kind of physiological things happen, your heart racing, your palms get sweaty, and then notice how you feel afterwards. And almost always, people have this incredible sense of relief. They have this incredible sense of relief no matter what happens with the person, even if the person gets upset or rejects them and their worst fear comes true, which sometimes happens, usually doesn't. But even if it does, there's a sense of unburdening and relief that is profound, and that becomes its own addiction. Blanton calls it the cheap thrills of telling the truth. And so once you start, you'll find yourself naturally drawn to doing it more. So starting small and building up is definitely the way to go. You don't want to come screaming out of the gate with total transparency 24/7. Although if you're willing to do that, then I commend you.
Well, there's a saying, the truth will set you free. And I feel
Yeah.
for me that is true because I think people do respond to authenticity because I've been doing YouTube for 15 years and I got more live viewers when I did my revealing my lung cancer diagnosis. I never had 1,600 people watching live, even with Dr. McDougall on
Yeah.
before. And so I felt it was very liberating. And I had I want to say lived a lie for 2 years, having this secret that I wanted to share, but I was afraid to share because what would people think and would I be hurting veganism? And some of the top doctors said you shouldn't share. And it's like inside, my inside, I wanted to, but I was listening to other people. And then, like, once I did it, it was liberating. And I feel so much better and lighter. And I can't tell you how great it's been since then.
I mean, my first experience with true radical honesty was in the amends step of 12 step when I got sober and I was working the steps. And so there's a step to make a list of all of the people that you've wronged, and then when appropriate, when it won't do more harm, that you make amends to them. And what I discovered while I was making amends is that it really didn't matter if they were still pissed or if they didn't want to take my call or if they responded in a really cold or hostile way. And all of those things happen because, when you're an alcoholic, you cause a lot of damage in your relationships. Sometimes it was a joy. I would connect back with people I was terrified to contact, and they welcomed me back with open arms, and so that was wonderful as well. But even when it wasn't, even when it was terrible, and they wanted nothing to do with me, and they slammed the phone down on me, I felt that unburdening. And I tell you, it's the closest thing to a superpower that I've discovered in life is when you know that you can do this thing that you're so scared of, and you can go through the physical feeling of the terror, and you're shaking, and you're just sweating, and your heart's racing, and you can get yourself through that to the other side, and you're still here and you did it. It's just incredible. It's just a high like no other. And so then you want to do it more. And I think there's great value in doing it more. And people
Absolutely.
people recognize that authenticity.
Well, I've heard that saying, and maybe it came from the 12 steps, is you're only as sick as your secrets.
As sick as your secrets. That is an oldie but a goodie. And they really, the whole kind of continuation, the 12 steps are not, you don't just do 1 through 12 and then you're done. You continue to work them in a cycle, because you have to continually recognize where you are suppressing yourself, where you are out of line, where you are holding resentments that you're not telling people about or you're not acknowledging. And so this constant sort of acknowledgement is what keeps you sober in the 12 step kind of idea of how this works. And if you don't continue to monitor yourself that way, eventually the thinking in 12 step is that you're going to drink over it. And I tend to agree with that. If not drink, I haven't picked up alcohol in over 11 years now, but I definitely have had moments of being what we would call a dry drunk, where I'm not drinking, I'm not using alcohol, but I'm behaving in an avoidant alcoholic way around those kinds of things, where I'm not acknowledging those resentments, I'm not setting those boundaries, I'm suppressing and internalizing. And what that does is it makes you shrink and hate yourself and be filled with all of this shame. And that makes us much more likely to fall into any kind of addiction, whether it's a physical addiction or an emotional or interpersonal addiction.
Yeah, it's interesting. Just to change notes for a minute, I just want to show you a present I received at Christmas, and I thought of you because I think you'd really, really like it. Um, I only have a certain amount left. Do you know what these are?
Oh yeah, those are the Lissa's wraps. Those are amazing.
Not only are they Lissa's wraps, these are Lissa's wraps made from by Lissa, one
With
for every 12 of them for the 12 days of Christmas.
that looks like the everything wrap too, which is the best.
Yeah, the everything bagel wrap. And she
Yeah.
gave me a private lesson on how to roll them because I had such a hard time. But now I know the secret technique about exactly how to place the
Oh,
lettuce and doing it. So
I
aren't they
need
the
to.
best?
I
Honestly,
need
aren't they the best thing ever
They're,
created?
they are wonderful, and Lissa is just a wonderful human, and yeah, they're so delicious. Every recipe from that book I've made has been amazing, but I am very partial to the everything bagel wrap, and I make the onion one a lot too because it's easy.
Yeah.
But yeah, I need a lesson because I have some off-brand dehydrator that makes more of a rectangle than a square, so I can't follow her instructions to get the little roll just right. So mine are always a little misshapen, but they're still delicious.
Well, I believe she uses an Excalibur, and you can get them really cheap on eBay and Facebook Marketplace because so many people buy dehydrators, and I don't know what they're thinking, beef jerky and then they never use them.
Yeah, yeah, it's true. It's true. Yeah, I'm one of those who I only use mine to make wraps, basically.
Yep, yep,
But yeah, no, fantastic. That what a nice gift. She's so
yep.
great.
She's I just love her. I mean, why can't we just be like her? And I don't mean that I
I
mean, but
know.
there is something about her essence, like that just is just so, I don't
Well,
know.
I did an interview with her on my YouTube channel about a year ago, and she, I think, this is a woman who has done her work. She has done the work. I think there were times in her life where she was kind of in a place of addiction and self-suppression, and, not being very radically honest in all kinds of ways, whether she used that language or not. And I think she went through that dark night of the soul and chose herself and really chose to be whoever she is in the world, no matter the cost. And that's the price you pay to go through the passage of becoming who you are. And I think we respond so positively to her because she is so authentic, and we can really feel that in her. And yeah, she and Nate are just both
Yep.
fantastic.
Yeah, they visited us during the holidays. Well, authenticity is the key, and if you can fake that, no, just kidding. But
Can't be faked.
I know it
Be
can't.
faked.
So, Mona would like to know, do you do virtual appointments?
I do. Yep, I do. So I do everything virtual these days, ever since the COVID craziness. So I have personal consults that you can arrange on my website, which is jenhawk.com. And I also have several virtual Zoom groups per every week. So I have a group every Saturday that I've been doing for years now called the Virtual Village. I have a women's group for women on Sundays. Right now I'm doing a dream interpretation group, and that's happening on Wednesdays. And so I've always got to have, or sorry, that's on Sunday. Wednesday is my emotional eating group. So I have a lot of group-based virtual experiences for people. So if you're interested in any of that, you can find more information on my website.
And that will be in the show notes momentarily, and you can click on the link, which is clickable. So I don't know if any question is too personal, please feel free not to ask it. But I listened to your book, and it seems like you've gone through quite a few dark nights of the soul recently.
Yeah, that's very true. It was in that position where I felt like I'd been through dark nights of the soul before, and I have. I had a pretty unusual childhood, and a less than ideal developmental context for that, and years, probably 15 years of daily blackout drinking, that led me to getting sober 11 years ago, which was obviously a very big dark night of the soul. You have to kind of hit bottom and go through that process to do that. But yeah, in the last year, sort of in most domains of my life, things fell apart. There was just kind of this great unraveling precipitated with the loss of my two wonderful dogs, one of whom you met at True North. You met Motown, who was just my baby, had been with me forever for 13 years, and since he was a puppy. And then very within a month after he passed, my other long-term dog, senior dog Melly, died, who was almost 16. And so, like an old married couple, they just went together. And that sort of, that and the end of a long-term relationship, and my mother's health crisis, and a number of other things just all kind of came together all at once. In the book, I call it the crappening.
I
And
love that name.
it
Yeah.
was really just sort of a perfect storm of, you have hit the limits of the ways in which you can be in the world in a facade, in a people pleasing facade, where you're not going to be true to yourself, and you're not going to do what you need to do. And like, are you really going to choose to turn away again? Because it's going to hit you harder next time if you do that. And so I think when you are confronted with a dark night of the soul like that, it is an invitation from the universe to pay attention, and you have, this is a fork in the road. And if you turn your back to that invitation, and you continue doing things as you've been doing them, it will come back again and continue to try to awaken you, and continue to try to bring you to consciousness. And I didn't want to see what it had in store for me next time. So I've been doing that work as much as I can, imperfectly as it is.
How did you come out of the crappening? How did you get help to pull yourself out? How long did it take?
A lot of good therapy. I think good therapy is very important. I think having somebody, and it's not so much the techniques and the magic that the therapist has. It is finding a relationship with someone who can hold that space for you to bring this muck into consciousness, all of these things that you've been hiding from yourself and hiding from the world for your entire life. You need to be in a safe relationship with somebody who can be in a room or be on a screen with you and let you vomit that up and be in it and not judge you for it and not try to fix it. Just let it exist and let it be. I think it is absolutely essential for people who have developmental trauma, for people who have been through very difficult events in their life, for people who are confronting this kind of moment in life, to have that kind of relationship. And I think it's rare for that sort of relationship to exist in our intimate circle. To try to make those demands on a spouse or a family member, I think pushes the limits of what that relationship can really take and sustain. You need somebody who's, and not necessarily an objective third party, because nobody's truly objective, but somebody who doesn't have skin in the game, in the sense that they're just there for you. They don't have a pre-existing relationship with you. They just are there for you. They're on your side, but they're not rooting for any particular outcome because their safety depends on it. And so I think good therapy is just essential. So that was the number one thing. And then I think a willingness to feel things that I have spent decades running away from feeling. I have a quote that I use all the time from Tara Brach, who is a meditation teacher. She says, the most important thing in our lives is what we are unwilling to feel. The things that we are unwilling to feel are actually quietly governing and directing our lives in this imperceptible way. And until we discover those things, until we become curious about what am I unwilling to feel and what am I willing to do to avoid feeling what I'm unwilling to feel? What kind of addictions am I willing to have? What kind of facade am I willing to be in? What kind of people pleasing, role playing BS am I committing myself to all the time just to avoid feeling some bad feelings? You've got to get deeply curious about that. And then you have to become willing to feel those things. And it's why I advocate telling the truth. I think it is the superhighway into feeling scary and very challenging emotions.
Yeah. Well, now that I've done, I think a lot of the work, I mean, I don't know if we're ever done. I agree with completely with what you say, that it's not necessarily the technique as much as the person. If you can find that person, and am blessed to find that person. His name is Mark, the Magical Unicorn, and I'm reticent to have him on the show, although he is scheduled for the last day of Thriving in the Face of Cancer, because everybody I've referred to him goes to him, and it's like, I'm just afraid I'm not going to get I'm being very selfish. I'm afraid I'm not going to be able to get an appointment, but it's like he does he does. I call it the movie Inside Out because that's the only way I can
It's
explain it.
really similar. Yeah.
Right. But I guess it's IFS, although he's not like an actual IFS therapist, but the idea of the holding of the space. And now that I've done the work and I've come out a lot, they always say the only way out is through. The cost of not feeling the feelings is actually, it feels worse, and the cost is greater than just doing it.
Exactly. Exactly. It feels like you're swallowing poison. It's so much. You may feel really bad by feeling the feelings. You may be in a fetal position on the floor crying your heart out. You might be, there were times where I was crying so hard I was just basically puking on the floor and I couldn't get up. Just times where you're just letting it move through you. You're just having this experience. That doesn't feel good for sure, but that is better and truer and more authentic than swallowing that poison and putting a happy face on it and pretending that you're fine. It's just that is what will make you sick. Whether it gives you cancer or not, there is evidence to the effect that it could, and other diseases as well. There's this remarkable book by Gabor Mate. I don't know if you talked about it on the show, called or read it, called When the Body Says No. But the thesis of the book is essentially that you live chronically with that kind of self-suppression long enough, and the body is going to assert itself. It cannot be totally denied. So whether it manifests as some type of chronic disease or another, or just kind of low level digestive problems or heart palpitations or these kind of psychosomatic things that people will experience and think, well, it's just getting older, or it's just how I am. Maybe that's true, or maybe there is this degree to which your mind and your body are deeply, deeply connected, and we've been really resistant to acknowledging that for a long time. But there is quite a literature out there, and a lot of evidence, whether or not it's taken seriously, that these effects can be real.
Well, yeah, as you know, and we're not going to mention any names, a lot of the plant-based doctors poo-poo this, but Dr. Dean Ornish said on the show 2 days ago, if mind-body medicine doesn't exist, have you ever gotten an erection? I mean, that's what he said. And I have not read When the Body Says No, but I put it on my piece of paper and I will take that and any other book recommendation you have today. But I did listen twice to The Body Keeps the Score.
Yeah, that's another really good one. Yeah, yeah. When the body says no is an even more like he has chapter by chapter sort of the personality syndrome associated with particular disease processes. So he talks about, is there a cancer personality? And of course, you have to be careful about these generalities. Every cancer is different. Every individual is different. But as a physician for many, many, many years in Canada and working with very vulnerable populations, including on Skid Row in Vancouver, you have some pattern recognition. He started to have some pattern recognition, and he's a very deeply empathetic clinician who really got to know his patients and started to see over time there are some patterns here, there are some commonalities. And when you go into the literature, I was amazed to discover there's a like a journal of psychosomatic medicine. There are peer-reviewed journals that look at these things. You will see that there are studies that are showing it's kind of a different constellation of personality characteristics that are more likely to manifest as cancer than heart disease, for example, that whole type A, type B split. And a lot of this is poo-pooed. A lot of it is totally dismissed. And I think it does a disservice to just dismiss it out of hand. Like, let's engage deeply with this question and take it seriously. If we don't believe the evidence, then let's run those experiments. Let's have longer, more sustained trials and really do more prospective studies. There have been some, but let's do more. I think there's just been so much bias against even engaging with the question that we don't have that kind of robust, peer-reviewed, double-blind, placebo-controlled evidence. That doesn't mean that it's impossible to achieve or that it wouldn't exist if we were to do that kind of research.
Yeah. Well, that's why I like going to an integrative doctor or a faith-based doctor because they believe some of these other things. And
Mm-hmm.
even though I haven't read the book yet, I've been trying to get him on the show forever. And when people say get somebody on the show, it's not that easy to just have them come on the show. But I have talked to some of his people, and you've inspired me to try again. I'm familiar more with the work of Louise Hay since my 20s about the
Sure.
probable
Yeah.
thought patterns. And obviously I never wanted cancer and I never really expected to get it, especially in the lung. But when I got it, I felt right away that all the healing was going to have to take place up here.
It's, yeah.
How much better could my diet have been, really, right? And
Yeah.
how much, I mean, so I knew that I had to look, I mean, it's not that I'm going to go eat a McDonald's diet now and stop exercising. That's not what I'm saying at all. I feel that the pristine diet and exercise habits have helped keep it at bay all this time. But I feel that the answer for me, and not that I won't take some conventional medicine, but that I have to, it's all going to be up here for me, all the work that I'm
Absolutely.
doing.
It's in
Yeah.
the mind and it is in the body in an emotional sense. So it's, these feelings, there's another saying in 12 step, you have to feel it to heal it. And really what that means is you have to like let this as the body keeps the score discusses, the issues are in the tissues. You really got to move through it. You have to have this genuine, authentically emotional experience of things that have been repressed. And I'm sure in Chinese medicine, the lungs are very associated with grief. That's the number one thing. And how much unexpressed grief do you have? My
Well,
goodness,
having lose, here's the thing, having lost all those babies,
the babies.
I never had a person to help me because they weren't yet. Two of them were almost born. And because they weren't born, the help that was available there were like, well, they weren't real babies. because until like it's if you had the
Right.
baby and it was dead then, and so I never
And
got
so
to
you're not
process it.
allowed to mourn.
Yeah,
You're keeping,
exactly,
yeah.
and I found one rabbi that was helping me, but it was sort of like, yeah, so that's what I'm doing now. And listen, I would much rather do that work than have cancer. So I am honestly
Yeah.
willing to do
Yeah.
anything now, whatever I have to feel to heal. But what's interesting, Dr. Jen, is that it's kind of like when people become vegan, they're like, they found the truth and they want everybody to be vegan. Not everybody wants to do this work. And I would love to
Sure.
be able to have deep and meaningful conversations with my husband because, there are things and he is so he's not watching, I don't think, but he's so shut down. Like he won't
Yeah.
go to like, because we have like, I joke and I go, go to the support group for the spouse. I go, you may be able to find your next wife there, but I try to use humor, but that is one of the reasons I do go to the support groups for cancer. And a few people said to me, you shouldn't go to those groups because they're for the dying. Well, I disagree because if they're there, they're not dead, right?
Right.
And
Right.
also, that's where I'm finding survivors. And the thing that's giving me the most hope is talking to survivors. And I met a friend. He's now like my buddy, and he's 17 years from lung cancer. 17 years. And
Mm.
how would I ever have found him if I hadn't gone to the groups? But I think in these groups we do practice radical honesty because
Totally.
like we don't have a choice anymore,
Yeah, what do you have to lose? Yeah.
Nothing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's such a, I mean, the other thing is, what, even if this did nothing for a chronic disease process, cancer, whatever people are facing, there is still so much value in doing this kind of work for your well-being. You're not walking through the world on eggshells all the time. You're not feeling resentful and pissed off all the time. You're not, that's the number one thing that probably my most common client is a woman in middle age who just is full of rage. She's just full of rage and simmering anger, and she's outwardly very agreeable and she puts everyone else first and she takes care of everyone else, but she has just this deep simmering volcano of rage within her. So let's like not live that way, whether that has manifested as cancer or not. I don't see why we should refuse to experiment with these techniques, which are not invented by these authors we're talking about. They're not new at all. They're very ancient. These are things that all of the mystics and wise traditions have talked about for since time immemorial. And so I think when it comes to self-development, when it comes to healing, when it comes to reclaiming wholeness of any kind, and health comes from the word for whole, that's one and the same, that we have to retrieve these parts of ourselves, as you're discussing with IFS adjacent work. That's the kind of work that I do more in a Jungian tradition as well. I think it can go by a lot of different names, but we're making ourselves more whole, and we are bringing more of ourselves on board rather than feeling just all of this unexpressed anger and resentment about what we can't do, or it feels that we can't do.
I think so many people are afraid of it though. I joked with Dr. Matt, who's now going to be a regular on my show, and
Mm-hmm.
he's always wanted to do improv comedy, and that's like my big that's the other thing. What a terminal diagnosis does is you get busy with the business of living, and now
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
mean, any spare moment I have, I'm doing comedy, improv, stand up, and that's always been my first love of my life. And he's always wanted to do it, but he's afraid. And I said to him, I go, my God, everybody just like nobody's afraid of chemotherapy. I mean, I am,
Right.
but like people are like, but like improv is not going to kill you. And
Right.
people will do all these things, like they'll do the surgery, the radiation, the chemo, but God forbid they should express a feeling. And the kind of work we're talking about, it's not one specific thing. But the thing is it's relatively low cost, it's non-toxic, and it's actually not going to kill you.
Sure, right. Yeah. I mean, radical honesty might blow up some of your relationships. It might, if you have relationships that are based on a version of yourself that is a mask and a facade and a performance, that once you start becoming honest, and that's the reason that you're not doing it, probably is it's probably going to put some stress on that relationship and cause some conflict. And that's the number one reason that most people who do try to go down a road of recovery and sobriety and 12 step, for example, they run into that first year where their spouse or their friends are like, hey, you're not any fun anymore. Like, I don't even know who you are anymore. You've really changed. You're not the same, because they made a contract with that person, whether it was a marriage or a friendship or a work relationship, that was premised on you're going to keep pretending to be somebody that you're not. And if you change the rules on me, I might not like you anymore. So radical honesty will churn that sort of thing up. And it is very difficult. It poses a lot of challenges to relationships. It may make you change careers. It may have all kinds of effects in your life. But I think you will find if you go deeply with people who have done this kind of work that they will universally tell you that it was more than worth it. And that coming into themselves and reclaiming who they really are is more valuable than any other relationship that they could have. And if it was based on them pretending to be someone they're not, it was just completely unsustainable.
Yeah. And sometimes when you tell the truth, it gives other people permission. I received so many phone calls and texts and emails, like the lovely one I got from you when I revealed my lung cancer diagnosis. And believe it or not, some of the calls were from medical doctors who basically said, I hate my job
Yeah.
and I want to
Yeah.
do this. And like, because I was basically telling people, look, don't wait for a cancer diagnosis. If you hate your husband, and if you hate your job, don't wait until you're under the threat of a surgeon's knife and have a diagnosis. Live, do make these changes now. And it touched a nerve, and a lot of people were saying, and they called me up and said, I kind of hate what I'm doing. And there's nothing worse when you hate what you're doing, or hate who you're
Yeah.
married to, but you feel like you can't make these changes, So,
Yeah, people feel so trapped. They feel as if they don't want to disappoint people. They will avoid telling the truth about being unhappy in a relationship or in a job because they're afraid it will freak someone else out or it will hurt someone else. And that is very often just control of their own fear masquerading as care for another person. So, we obviously do care. We don't want the people who are closest to us to suffer needlessly, but a lot of the justification of I'm going to just stick it out in this miserable situation is to avoid our own fear. And we really have to be, little forensic detectives to be very courageous and investigate the ways in which we're doing that to ourselves and to the people around us, because ultimately it's not fair to anyone else to continue to be in that sort of situation for the so-called sake of someone else. You are harming more than just yourself in that situation.
how do you be honest or radically honest or brutally honest without hurting the other person's feelings? That's where I need some
Yeah.
refining. And somebody suggested to learn nonviolent communication
Yeah.
because I'm an
Yeah.
Aries, and so I just kind of say it, and that doesn't
Yeah.
always land well.
Yeah. I know I have an Aries moon, so I have my moments. I think nonviolent communication is a great tool. I know Dr. Letterman is very versed in that. I had a great conversation with him about that last summer. And I think anybody who has done that training or is familiar with those techniques, I don't think it has to be formalized according to nonviolent communication rules. I think it's a skill like any other skill. So one of the problems I have with the OG radical honesty literature by Blanton. Blanton is this very tough talking, tobacco chewing, tough guy, and I think he gets a certain exhilaration out of being very blunt and offending people. And I think to be honest in the way that I'm talking about does not require that kind of bluntness, and it's a very kind of masculine approach to things. I think it's much more about speaking your inner truth as you're experiencing it and it doesn't have to be in a particularly sugar-coated way, but in a non-judgmental, non super confrontational way. So when you dive into the technique of radical honesty as they describe it, it's very much a present moment exercise. You can't do mind reading. You can't say, I'm pissed at you because you didn't come home last night, and because you just don't care about me, because you don't know that that is true. A third party could not verify that that is true. All you can say is, I was expecting you to come home last night at a certain time. And when you didn't, I felt very angry. And these things happened in my body. And today I'm afraid to have this conversation with you because I'm afraid you're going to get triggered and fight back with me. And so I'd rather just not bring it up, but I feel like I need to. That's the kind of conversation that we're really trying to have. And it takes practice. It's especially for people who are maybe a little more blunt by nature.
Yeah. Well, I definitely can learn to refine it because I know I can be rough around the edges, and other people are sensitive. But we're actually both sensitive, I believe. I mean, are you familiar with Elaine Aron's work, Highly Sensitive Persons?
I'm familiar with that work. I don't know her name specifically, but I know the concept of being an HSP, and totally. And I think somebody, a child who is a highly sensitive person, is much more likely to get the memo very early on in life that they are too much, that they need to shut it down, that there are things that they say that are displeasing to other people, and they need to not do that because, oh, suddenly mom doesn't love me anymore when I do that, or oh, that seems to make people freaked out, or oh, that got me, sent to my room and neglected for a night. There is pattern recognition and adaptation that goes on in our early developmental environment, which I think is more intense for highly sensitive children. And because they're more likely to be picking up on all kinds of little cues in the environment and telling the truth about them, as children do. Hey, that guy's not wearing any clothes, said the children to child to the emperor. And they're more likely to experience that feeling, that total feeling of abandonment and estrangement, when that is received in a negative way by their caregivers. And so that's how we wander into adulthood, deep in these ruts of behavior and patterns. And we tend to not challenge them until we face a crisis in life that forces us to wake up.
When I think about some of the people in life that I most admire, they are people that not only live fully, but don't seem to be afraid to be themselves. And I think about Dr. John McDougall in particular.
Yeah, yeah. I think people who are able to just there is kind of a tell it like it is quality to some people that I think comes more naturally, and some of that might just be, they have a little more of that disagreeable juice in their personality. I think in general that comes easier to men than it does to women. I haven't met a lot of women like that. Even women who kind of have a persona of a straight talking B word, they kind of like, yeah, they are soft little squishy underbellies when you poke them. And I don't think all the guys are like that as much, although probably more than we think they are.
Yeah. Well, one thing you did that I thought was really smart, but I was advised not to do it because my YouTube channel started 15 years ago, is on your YouTube channel, you have your comments turned off. And ideally, I would have loved to have done that because if they're turned off, people can't say mean things about you. But because I had not done that, I was advised not to like just start doing that. So what I do is something that Dr. Lyle advised me to do years ago is just don't read them. So I've just what I had to do in order to be able to come out and reveal the truth is I had to take myself off social media completely. So I
Yeah.
don't see now when people make mean videos about me or say
Yeah.
mean comments. And that was the only way that I could deal with it. But then I thought to myself, so what? What are they going to say about me that's worse than having cancer? I mean, cancer has
Exactly.
raised the bar so high now. What can anybody really say or do to me? I mean,
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
hit me with your best shot.
Yeah, no, I think frequently about re-enabling comments on my channel for that reason, because I think once you test yourself a little bit by going down the road of telling the truth, going down the road of being more yourself, you come to a more authentic place of, they what they say says so much more about them than it does about me. People are doing their own thing. They're having their own experience, and I don't need to necessarily punish myself by reading negative comments as a hobby and vocation. But I don't think coming across a negative one is going to send me into the same kind of shame spiral that it would have a couple of years ago. Now that I have done some of this work, it's still not my favorite thing in the world. I'm not going to seek it out, but I don't feel as brittle and fragile in the face of that kind of criticism. And that is the power of doing this kind of reclaiming retrieval work of these parts of ourselves that are terrified of criticism, terrified of rejection, terrified of abandonment. We gently bring them back on board and show them that it is safe to be here, and then we can weather much stronger storms as a result.
Somebody once said that people can only pull you down when they're far below you. And although I didn't watch
Mm,
any of the videos that came out about why Chef AJ has lung cancer, the people that made them are people that don't have very large followings. You know what I'm saying? Not
mm,
that I'm saying I'm that great or anything, but it's just interesting on the kind of people that would do that kind of thing because people that are very secure, you don't see like uh, uh, Joel Furman making videos about me or Colin Campbell or Dr.
right,
Essels. You know what I'm trying to say? Exactly,
right,
you don't see people that are secure with themselves that, they're not making these hatred videos about me or making these comments. So that's kind of interesting. But don't you feel that sometimes women are disproportionately attacked more than men?
Oh, definitely, definitely. I mean, the sort of entrenched, institutionalized misogyny is a very real thing, and I think men face their own challenges. They're not. It's not as if it's just all great for men and totally sucks for women. But I think there is more general misogyny baked into the cake in the online environment, and that men tend to be really just unfamiliar and insensitive to that because they're looking through what we would call in evolutionary psychology through their egocentric bias. They kind of maybe are invigorated by criticism. It surges their testosterone and their competitive instinct, and they're like, oh, you want to go, let's go. Women are just not that way, and so many women, myself included, I mean, I have just disappeared for years at a time because of a harsh word, sometimes not even directly said to me, but that I heard through the grapevine that somebody said. It's just enough to completely shut me down and hide from anyone who might have that kind of attitude. And I think again, it's not a matter of, well, you have to somehow protect yourself from ever encountering that kind of criticism. It's about doing the inner work that makes you more resilient to it. And it is possible to do. It's just not what we think it is. It's not sitting there, telling a bunch of affirmations about how I don't care and I'm a tough guy. It's actually doing this. It involves a lot of crying. It involves a lot of crying and wailing and hitting things and feeling really out of control and like a small child to reclaim some of that internal strength. So it's not what we imagine it's going to look like.
Yeah, they always say, in a lot of times in, especially in church type circles, that it hurt people. And
Mm,
I would never think to leave, even if I didn't care for somebody, I would never think to leave like a mean comment or comment on their appearance. I find that so interesting. Like that, I wonder that the mean things that people like comment on your social media, like would they come up to the street and say, you're fat?
right.
Like, would they do that?
Right.
Maybe. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't think so. I think the anonymity of social media has just brought out the worst in civilization. And there's actually been a couple of academics, I think in political science, I remember seeing this at some conference I attended, have done the empirical work of this, and they've shown how there is a race to the bottom on Twitter or other social media outlets, where essentially the most aggressive and disagreeable voices win out. And so the more nuanced, shyer, hey, let's take it easy kind of voices just get crowded and pushed out, and they eventually have less tolerance for engaging in that kind of debate and discourse at all. So they leave, they defect, and you just have this kind of cesspool of angry, aggressive people left. And that is unfortunately what really has happened in comment sections everywhere.
Mm. Is that a cat that's walking by?
That's Lucy. That's Lucy the Chewini. Have you
Oh
not
my
met Lucy?
God, it's so cute. It's just so small. I kept seeing a tail.
Falling down. This is Lucy. Lucy Goosey.
He's so cute. I kept walking by, and every time I notice, I'm like, is that a cat? That's so
Yeah.
cute.
She knows I'm distracted, so she's looking around for anything that she could, little bits of kibble she could steal from something, or other kinds of trouble she could get into.
I know that historically you've had large dogs, but aren't little dogs great because you can do that?
There, yeah. It took me a while to kind of warm up to her. I didn't quite, my brain didn't quite understand her as dog for a while. But once it did, I'm very attached. I'm very fond of her. So I
How
still have
many?
the two kind of pity mixes back there who are just couch potatoes sleeping on the couch. But Lucy's the only one who's been brave enough to go out in the snow right now. We've got a ton of snow, and she's just so brave and feisty and plucky, and she's old. She's how old are you? 15?
Oh my
14,
gosh.
15? We adopted her as a senior, and so she's an old lady.
Oh, that's so nice.
But she's
Yeah.
very cute.
I
She's a
love
sweetheart.
dogs. Well, that's what we share. We love dogs.
Yes,
They're my
I
favorite
know.
people. So other than maybe kind of like not thinking that evolutionary psychology is the be all and end all anymore, have you changed your views on other things like perhaps trauma, that it maybe does make a difference?
Oh, sure. I mean, that was another kind of I don't know, crack in the foundation of how I was approaching my intellectual work is I started to look really deeply into the twin studies and the methodology of behavioral genetics in particular, all of which are kind of the foundation of an argument that, so-called trauma doesn't matter. And I think a lot of this is semantics and gets into games around, well, what do we really mean by trauma? What do we really mean by trauma mattering? And it can just escalate into this rhetorical standoff, which doesn't actually help anybody or resolve any issues. But I think if you consider trauma in the way that I see it defined very often, that I tend to think of it, that Gabor Mate and others talk about, which some people will call it, small t trauma. So the developmental environment that you grew up in that trained you to be a certain way, to perform a certain way, to secure the love and safety of your environment and your caregivers, that is sticky, that those patterns that you developed in that environment are a lot stickier than we give them credit for. And I think another woman that I interviewed at some point, Jenna Pacelli, said, we say that kids are resilient. What we really mean is that they're very adaptive, but it's going to cost them. So we can adapt to really dysfunctional developmental environments as kids. We can't just kind of shed that like an old skin when we turn 18 and move into adulthood. We're going to carry over a lot of those patterns that we use to secure a feeling of attachment and love and affection from our parents in our adult relationships. We're going to continue to have a lot of the same fears. We're going to continue, if we have always received the most attention and affection for being a version of ourselves that was very, in my case, very precocious, very, kind of the smartest kid in the class kind of routine. Like that was where the value in my home came from. And so I have had a very hard time admitting when something is difficult for me, admitting when maybe I have something to learn here, admitting when I am really struggling with something, because that terror of I'm going to be rejected and nobody's going to love me anymore is just deep, deep, deep in that cellular memory that I have. And so it's not that you can't do work and relearn these things and relearn ways of relating to other people. It's just, I'll often use the analogy of it's like the side of the road that you learn to drive on. If you learn to drive on the right side of the road, you're going to have a heck of a time being dropped off in London at rush hour trying to get around town. You probably could do it. You, especially if your kid was sick and you had to get him to a hospital, you could manage to figure it out, but you'd make a lot of mistakes. You'd be super stressed out. It would not be something that you would feel very comfortable with and want to do on a regular basis. I think of a lot of the adaptations that we made as a kid into our adolescence and our young adulthood. It's the side of the street that we learn to drive on. And if we want to learn to drive on the other side of the street, we need to do a lot of very uncomfortable work to learn those new patterns, to do everything against instinct and kind of backwards and upside down from our natural tendency. So that's how I think of trauma mattering. Like that kind of trauma does matter. It does shape us into a set of reactive patterns that are very difficult to rewire, but not impossible.
Yeah, I actually did trauma therapy, and it wasn't that bad. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
like it was very healing just to write my story, and then you
Yeah.
read it over and over until it was like,
Yeah. Yeah.
uh,
Yeah. And I think it doesn't even, in my case, I know that I had this very unusual childhood. I grew up in, a lot of people tell me I need to read the book Educated by Tara Westover. I don't know if you've read that or come across it, but it's a memoir from a woman who grew up kind of in a cult in Alaska and a religious cult. And, I wasn't in a religious cult, but I was in this bizarre kind of off grid little cabin with no running water or heat in the middle of nowhere when I was very, very young, and very, very, very isolated and very, very, very cold, and a family dynamic where my father was an alcoholic slash addict, my mother was as codependent as you can possibly get. Things were very, very dysfunctional in a really serious way, and so I don't remember a lot of details. I've really blocked out most of my childhood childhood. I have almost no memories of home life. I have memories of school life, but I think you can still do so-called trauma work without remembering specifics. I think it's because it's about getting into the body. It's about feeling what comes up when you push into these uncomfortable spaces and uncomfortable truths that you've been avoiding. You don't have to have some sort of specific memory that you're trying to unwind with EMDR or something. You just have to be yourself and be present in the moment, and you can begin that healing process and becoming comfortable with the uncomfortable.
Yeah, that is something that John Pierre's been saying for years, be comfortable with the uncomfortable. And then you get comfortable
In
with it. Yeah.
in so many domains. I mean, I say a lot of this work is like building muscle. It is like you have to push yourself. You have to do the thing that feels like, oh, I don't want to do that. It's going to hurt. Bad things are going to happen. And you have to kind of, break things down to build them back up. There is a very universal mystical truth to that.
Yeah. Well, a lot of people are asking, and I think I know the answer because I believe Doug said it on the podcast, that if you're still doing the podcast and if you're still writing the book with Doug.
Oh no, I have parted ways on both of those things. So yeah, I believe he's planning to have that book out this year, and the podcast continues on its merry way. I think they're mostly publishing on X these days.
Okay, thank you. Well, you have your own book and it's great, and I encourage you to get it. And if you give me a direct link to it, you give me the link to your website, we can actually add that to the show notes. It makes it easier if people can just.
I have a slide that has a
Sure,
QR code, so I could share that. Let me
sure.
see.
And then they could just take a picture.
Yeah, exactly.
I
Let's
really
see.
enjoyed listening. I'm a listener more than a reader.
So we'll skip through all of these.
Oh
Let's
my
see.
gosh. Do you have a presentation? Come back and get the
I
presentation.
do, but we didn't get to it, so I will
Well,
skip
let's
through
do it.
everything.
Let's do it another time.
We can do it another time for sure.
Yeah.
So
Oh, I love it. Oh, it's got
there's
dogs in it. There you go.
there's my whole little family. And that QR code will take you to the book page of my website. But if you just go up to the top banner, that'll take you to the main website, which is jenhawk.com. So everything is there. My community hub is there where you can have access to the groups. You can book consults there. You can buy the book or the audio book there. That's everything lives there. So
That's awesome. We'll
yeah.
have to come back and give that presentation. Do you still work with people a lot, on food and weight? Because I've been
Yeah.
talk about radical honesty. I've been trying to leave that space for years. I've always felt like I said everything I could say in my book, The Secrets to Ultimate Weight Loss, and I felt like Batman. I'm not Batman, but Adam West, who I loved Adam West. I thought when I was little, him and Chad Everett were just, oh my God, the two handsomest men in the world. But he was a terrific actor, but he never really could get a part after Batman, other than I think he was on Love Boat once. And I felt like I got so pigeonholed, and that
Sure.
wasn't my passion. It was like, hey, I went to True North, I met Dr. Lyle, Dr. Goldhammer, they told me what to do, and I did it. And then I realized, and this is why I believe there's just another piece of healing, because I when I would work with people on their weight and food addiction, it was that other piece. It's like I understand. I know they knew what the diet was and they knew that they should have a clean environment, but it was something else going on that made it impossible. And not being a trained coach or psychologist, I couldn't help them with that piece, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. That's why I started the weekly group about our emotional relationship with food. It's called Enough and it's free. That's something that happens every Wednesday. You can find that Zoom link on my website. And you can, if you join the kind of community hub I have, that's how you can watch replays and participate in conversations and all of that. But the calls themselves are free. And it's very, the mission of that group is we are not doing diet culture here. We are not talking about, how to eat left of the red line. We are not talking about the rules of how to lose weight. We are not talking about more pounds faster. We're taking a much more holistic approach to, why am I on this hamster wheel? Why am I in this binge restrict cycle? How am I feeling about the fact that I've regained weight, or how am I feeling about the fact that I've lost weight and people are treating me differently? It's a very emotionally driven group. And so there's kind of a manifesto about what that's about. And the link to join it on my website, it's just jenhawk.com/enough.
Yeah.
So
Well, what we
yeah,
could do is you have 4,000 characters, so we could update your show notes if you want to make
sure.
them just a little bit
Yeah.
more specific so people
Yeah.
can find those things. So other than When the Body Says No, other great book recommendations, especially if they're on
Oh
Audible,
gosh.
because I can't see worth
Oh.
crap anymore.
I mean, all of Gabor Mate's work, I think, would be helpful, especially when you think about, I mean, the to the degree that I do engage with people on the healthy eating food question, it's from that kind of food addiction perspective and addiction in general, and using food to change our state. Yeah, I think the primary reason that people restrictors as well as bingers, but especially bingers, are using food to get out of their body. You know, I have a whole chapter in the book about this. You don't want to feel the wisdom that your body is sharing with you. Your body is telling you you're in an unsafe situation. You need to do something about it. I don't like this. You don't want to hear that. You want to shut it down. And the most effective way to do that is to beat it into submission with a ton of food. And so we will do that. We will engage in these state changing behaviors around all kinds of different addictions. And so I think Gabor Mate's other book called In the Realm of Hungry Ghosts is about addiction specifically. And his new book is called The Myth of Normal, which is also very good. He's just a brilliant, fascinating character. You know, his origin story is that as a baby in Hungary, in Budapest, his mother, fleeing the Nazis, handed him to strangers because she was so afraid. She's so afraid of what was happening and what would happen to him. So to keep him safe, she just gave her baby to strangers, not knowing if she would ever see him again or if they'd ever be reunited. They eventually were, but you know, that is kind of for him this fundamental sense of abandonment and terror and disconnection with his mother has taken a lifetime. He's in his 80s now, of becoming conscious of that and working through it and being very sensitive to how other traumas can show up and govern other experiences for his clients and his patients and other people, whether they're that significant or not. I think just the chronic experience of being unrecognized and unattuned in childhood that many of us have can be very significant. So his books are just wonderful. There are a bunch. I mean, I think on my book page on the website, I have the footnotes for Truth Be Told, which is my book. And so you could comb through those footnotes and see all of the books that are referenced in the footnotes. That's all of my source material. I've learned so much from Marion Woodman, who is an incredible Jungian analyst who passed away a couple of years ago. She's kind of a wacky writer. She's a little tricky to read sometimes, but she's totally brilliant. The other Jungian authors, James Hollis, James Hillman. I mean, there's a lot of really great stuff out there, but you can find it in that bibliography.
Well, I know that Rich Roll really liked Gabor Mate. He interviewed him, and I have 3 Audible credits, so maybe I'll just get all 3 of his books.
Yeah, yeah, I did. It's funny. I talked to him. I interviewed him for my dissertation years ago because I've been following him since before he got really well known. And so when I was doing dissertation research, I think in 2010 or 2011, I had a phone call with him when he was very easy to reach, and he would just be happy to talk to some random PhD student. And he was he did not like my argument in my dissertation because he did not think it was sensitive enough to the question of generational trauma in Alaska Native populations, which is who I was working with and what I was looking at. And so I remember the conversation. He was sort of like, "Yeah, you've got some interesting ideas, but you're totally off base and you need to take this more seriously." And at the time, I just couldn't hear it. I just didn't want to hear it. And I'm like, oh, what's this guy talking about? And I've really come back full circle. And now I really regret that I had that opportunity to talk to him. And now he's way too much of a big shot to get on the phone again. But, I think he has just amazing clinical insight from all of his work, and tons of great interviews out there on YouTube with him on other channels, even if you can't snag him, although I hope you can.
Yeah. Well, Dr. Mate, if for some reason you're watching or anybody
That's
that
right.
knows you watching, both of us would love to be able to interview you. So
Or Peter Levine or Bessel van de Kolk, or there's kind of this pantheon of mind body experts out there who I think a whole any or all of those people would be tremendous to have on.
yeah, absolutely. Well, you'll have to come back and give your presentation.
Yeah.
Anything exciting or next for you coming up, speaking anywhere? You don't do social media, so people shouldn't or can't follow you there, right?
I do. I am. I have crept back on social media, so I do post on Instagram fairly frequently, which is JWHOWK. I have a podcast which I was attempting to do weekly for a while and got out of the habit of. But the whole New Year's resolution has me recommitting to doing a regular podcast, which is called The Face of the Deep, and that and my general musings also post on X sometimes. And I think that's the deeper pod is the handle there. But yeah, I don't really do Facebook anymore, but Twitter and Instagram I do.
Well, if you want to know how you can get regular with doing one every week, is do one every day. And then when you give that up, it's pretty easy to do one a week.
I wish I could have the kind of stamina and fortitude to do that. As you know, I try to spend time every day totally offline and wandering around in the woods, like hugging trees and examining. We have all the snow right now, so I've been like tracking snow prints, and you can see where a hawk came down and the landing pattern of the feet and then the wings on the snow. It's just amazing out there. So
We
I've
have
been
a hawk.
wandering. Yeah, I love the
Yeah, that's
hawk.
funny
You
because your
guys have.
last name is Hawk, but our
Mhm.
hawk terrorizes our birds, and it's like,
Yeah, it's the shadow side of the hawk identity is that we do have a violent, terrorizing side, but that's a whole other conversation about
oh,
shadow work and doing shadow. But a lot of that is in my book, so
right.
it's so critical. The things that we judge the most in the external world are often the things that are most unresolved within us.
Well, it's a great read, and in my case, a great listen. But that platform that you're on, I've never heard of that until you told me about it.
Yeah, I used BookFunnel. I wanted to avoid Audible because Audible has such. I used to do. I recorded some. I did some voice work for other authors back in the day when as a side hustle, and so meeting Audible standards as an independent recording artist who's doing it in my closet with a USB mic. It was a little challenging, and also Amazon just takes a huge chunk of the price. So you really have to overcharge for your book if you want to make any money on Audible. So I prefer to do it the indie route.
Yeah, that's okay. I have
Yeah.
one more question for you. I'm asking every guest during this month of this series, which is called Thriving in the Face of Cancer. What message of hope would you share with someone currently facing a cancer diagnosis?
I would say that you have such untapped resources and resilience and courage and perseverance and all of these things that you don't even know that you possess if you start to do this kind of inner work, if you start to retrieve these parts of yourself that have been long abandoned and hidden away and buried underground. If you start to reclaim them, and telling the truth is the super highway to doing it. It will get you into those emotions which are very uncomfortable, which will bring all of this back to consciousness. You will find yourself developing additional resources that you had no idea that you had to face this or anything in your life. And so I think there's a tremendous amount of hope if you are willing to turn into that work and choose yourself above who you feel you need to be to other people.
Yeah, thank you. Well said, and it will help you heal. Thanks so much. I look forward to having you back to do your presentation.
Sounds good. Sounds
All
wonderful.
right.
It's so good to
It's
see you.
so
And
good to see
so
you too. And
sending
I'm glad that the crappening is no longer happening.
the crappening is on hiatus. Yeah. Hi,
Good.
Princess. Princess
Okay.
knows we're wrapping up. So, but yes, much good healing energy to you, and
Oh,
take care of yourself.
thank you so much. And thanks all of you for watching day 9 of Thriving in the Face of Cancer. I want you to know that wherever you are in your cancer journey, as long as you're still breathing, I believe that there's still hope and that you too can thrive even in the face of cancer. Please tune in tomorrow at 9 a.m. Pacific time for day 10 of Thriving in the Face of Cancer. My guest is breast cancer surgeon, Dr. Christy Funk. You won't want to miss that one. Take care, everyone, and tell the